Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from all people from all the parts of the planet, the world, and why not, universe. Welcome back to our virtual global leadership podcast, where we explore the journeys of some of the most innovative leaders from around the globe. Today, we are thrilled to have a special guest, Marcus, a trailblazer in the realm of leadership and remote work. With over 4 years of dedicated experience as a leadership coach and consultant, Marcus has mastered the art of helping individuals and organizations flourish in the digital workspace. Not only is a visionary in virtual leadership, but Marcus is also on the brink of releasing his new book, Beyond Avatars, making virtual leadership more human. This anticipated work delves into his rich insights and proven strategies for cultivating effective, engaged remote teams that transcend the digital divide. But Marcus' expertise doesn't stop there. As the head of engineering at Parabol, he is at the forefront of developing a collaborative software platform that's transforming how teams conduct agile meetings and retrospectives. His role is pivotal in shaping the company's strategy, driving goal achievement, and nurturing Parabol's technical talent within a culture that's both strong and inclusive. Marcus' top skills include leadership, excelling in remote work environments, people management, engineering, and coaching, making him a multifaceted leader in today's digital era. So let's dive into a conversation with Marcus and uncover the secrets to leading with empathy and effectiveness, no matter where we are in this world. Hi Marcus, how are you?
Hey, Sagar, thank you for having me, and what an intro. I'm very well after this intro from you.
Marcus, you're welcome. And I know that you have been in this journey since, let's say, I would say day one, because I learned during the last short call we had that this is how you have experienced your professional expression. Okay, so before we dive deep, yeah, I see you as someone who has always been part of the future of work. But still, I have this question for you. What does future of work mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's I don't know if I can give you a very specific answer because in my eyes, the future of work and how I've seen it in the past is it's continuously developing, right? Like the future of work is basically now already because we're continuing to develop. So I think for me, the future of work, if I have to put like one word to it, I think is flexibility. Like
Hmm.
we talk about remote work and actually been trying to write like a little article. Remote work is a weird word because it focuses so much on where people are. And I like, your podcast is called Virtual Global Leadership because I think that represents much more and how we're going to work in the future, whether that's hybrid, whether that's fully globally distributed, right? Like it all happens eventually online. Even if you're in an office, there's
Yeah.
probably collaboration happening online. So I think for me, the future of work is probably being flexible in a sense, if I have to put it in a short phrase.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, can you share a pivotal moment in your leadership journey that shaped the leader you are today?
Yeah, there's maybe two little things I can share. One, I have even a little story in my book. It's just a simple thing, but my dad basically has been in a kind of similar role that I'm in or I was in, but he's always worked in an office. But even as a young kid, you see your dad working, you don't realize what he does. So I think there was something in that shaped a little bit of how I approach leading. But to be more practical, I think what shaped me was probably happening before I even became like a manager, an engineering manager or a leader. There was a moment at the company where people got laid off, and I was an individual contributor. I was an engineer, but I had a really good relationship with that person that got laid off. And right after they got laid off, I had a 1 hour call with them where they cried, where I tried to console them, and I think that was for me a big moment in understanding how to treat relationships, how to work with people, how to work through emotions in this little square rectangle here. So I think when it comes to virtual leadership, that was probably one of the earliest moments that kind of shaped how I wanted to approach this.
So, Marcus, I see a lot of workshops and a lot of, let's say, training programs that are around, making people work efficiently when it comes to, the remote setup. I think, in my understanding, and please correct me if I'm, if I'm wrong with the data, that let's say in the last 7 or years, and especially post pandemic, remote work has risen even in the, in the Asian countries, specifically global south, right? So what are some of the, core areas where these trainings and workshops can happen and must happen? Because ultimately, it's an experience. Now there would be people from both the ends. There are people who would say, no, no, office is better, remote is better. But what are some of the fundamentals, one can develop? It would be
Yeah.
great to know that.
Yeah, I mean, the same is happening right now in, well, I don't know if it's the same, but in Germany, at least here, or in Europe, I see a lot of like return to office policies, right? They had to work during the pandemic, had to work virtually, and now they're struggling to make it work because what they do is they just continue to work as they did in the office, which for most of it won't work. You have to adapt and be flexible to, bring that word back in again. And I think the two main areas that sound very simple but are sometimes hard to get right if you're doing the virtual work like as a first thing. I think both things are communication and documentation. I think
Hmm.
everything that we do in almost all areas relies a lot on communication. And it sounds simple, right? We're talking right now, that's communication. But communication is so big, like even listening, how to listen well, active listening, like those topics, how to write well, how to, be precise and concise when you say something to someone. And we have a lot of different cultures when we work globally distributed. So how do you communicate with different cultures? They take things in differently. And then at the same level, documentation is so crucial because a lot can happen in our call here, right? If this is a work call, but no one else will know. So if we don't document things, especially in this virtual world, and this is for everyone, even in an office, I think it would be beneficial, is to write down decisions, to keep track of things, to allow for people to look at it on their own time because we have time zones, So I think communication and documentation should probably be those topics that people should teach in some of those workshops.
Marcus, networking is one of the most important, avenues of reaching out and connecting with people meaningfully. And then on-site or local networking, as we say, is has always been a wonderful experience. So what are some of the ways in which one can network remotely? And it could be between, the leadership team, or it could be
Yeah.
between the, the middle management or the central management. So how what are the best ways to do that?
Are you saying like in general or just inside a company or both?
General.
Okay. Yeah, in general, I think that's still a tricky thing, with like connecting to people across the world. But we're very good at, connecting online and be it on social networks and stuff. What I've been using is like LinkedIn, it's the main source for like business interactions or like topics around work. It has its pros and cons, there's maybe also not a lot of great content. I get it. But in terms of connecting with people, it's been always working very well for me, of like reaching out, writing a little like, hey, would love to connect because of this and that. Even in my past, I think the first time I became like a manager, the role was called like mobile lead, leading the mobile team at Buffer. I didn't really know what to do. Like I had a coach, but the job was so new. So what I did is I went on LinkedIn and searched for people doing a similar job and just tried to reach out. Of course, some didn't accept my invite, but then eventually I got connected to someone at Dropbox, and suddenly I was in a Zoom call with five PMs at Dropbox, and then you make up some relations and you find people. So that has been working okay. I mean, nowadays you get a lot of like connection requests, and you generally don't accept them, but that has been working out well. And then there's also conferences, For the past years, there haven't been many because of the pandemic, but now I think they're starting to show up again. There's various conferences around remote work, around leadership, around in my area like engineering leadership or engineering, and connecting with people there has been also really working well for me.
Thank you for sharing that. This question came in because sometimes I wonder, in the last, let's say, you were right when you shared that, wonderful to know that you were able to connect with the team of Dropbox. In the last couple of years, I have observed that any which ways our attention spans are at its ultra low, because we all
Yeah,
are we are trying to figure something out on LinkedIn. So just wanted to get a get your experience in terms of how to build that trust, because in offline you're having an interaction, you're meeting people, be it for leadership or for work or for general networking. At least there is a complete closure, uh,
yeah,
and you have a good amount of time to build trust. So I would love to know from you, what's your let's say trust creation process, uh, because uh, ultimately that is going to take things out. So just maybe a
yeah.
follow-up question there on trust building process.
Yeah, I mean, this probably goes for everything, not just for networking, but also building trust within a team, or
Yeah,
people you're managing.
yeah,
And
yeah.
my answer will sound simple. I'll elaborate on it, but I think for me, what has been working, this might be different for other people, but for me, what has been working in terms of trust is being honest and open, like transparency and honesty. I think
Hmm.
are for me the foundational elements of building trust.
Yeah,
Because you'll come off more authentic if you're like open, if you're honest, right? Like you're sharing maybe stories about yourself, of course, treating transparency always with empathy, not just putting out everything, but being also mindful of like, if I get to know a person like day one, I wouldn't share my whole life story, but I would start to add some glimpses of like who I am, what I'm about, and then the more the relationship grows, the more I would share. So I think for me that openness and that honesty are like my foundational values. I recently was coaching someone and we were doing like a values exercise where you find out what values you have, personal values. And I told them that once you know them, once you need to live them, you need to show others what your values are in your actions. And I asked that person, what do you think my values are? And they said, oh, probably openness and honesty. And I was like, correct, those are my values. So your daily interactions kind of need to represent those things. So for me, trust is being built by being transparent and honest.
thank you, Marcus, for sharing that. And what are some of the challenges when it within the remote team that you have observed when it comes to trust creation and communication?
Yeah, I mean, this is just one side I'm talking about. A relationship always, consists out of two people. So that other person needs to also engage with that. And if they're not, maybe they're, introverted, or maybe they have other, things they're working through, and they are not going to be as open and transparent as you are. Then the relationship and the trust will build slower. Like I think some literature talks about trust batteries. Like some are charged quicker and some are charged slower. So I think that's where the curiosity also comes in for me when you build trust, like being curious, because you need to understand the other person, like where are they coming from, what culture they're from, what are they currently living in, like what world are they living in, and so you understand, okay, that person might be a little bit reserved and not open up as quickly, which is okay. So you need to take your time with it. If there's one thing I learned being a people leader, is like with people you have to have patience. I was an engineer at first, and solving bugs and adding features, you can do that real quick by writing code if it's a small feature and you see the result. But with people, you have to have patience and it'll take your time. So I think there's definitely challenges in how diverse we all are, and that's where being patient and being curious comes into the mix.
Yeah, Marcus, I would love to know about the book that you're writing. What's the name of the book?
Yeah, you mentioned in the intro, it's called Beyond Avatars. We always have our little avatars in Slack and Zoom, and I thought it would be fun to play onto that and say like there's more behind that. And yeah, a lot of I've actually mentioned this is kind of in there, parts of what I just said, how to build trust and some of those things. And the subtitle of the book is like making virtual leadership more human. I'm not saying it is not human, but I think there's more we can do because people struggle with it. I've been, as you said, for the past 12 or 13 years, I've been working in here in this little rectangle. I've never worked in an office. So for me, this feels very natural. And I think there's something that I want to share with people and taking something from that and learning how to maybe be a bit more human in like this virtual world.
And what made you, write this book? And also feel free to share some of the, interesting learnings that you have written it. Maybe like a sneak peek
Yeah.
to the book.
Yeah. I don't know what made me write it. I've been, for the past few years, I've been writing here and there. It's been fun. It taught me a lot also about, not it teach me, it taught me, sorry, English isn't my first language. It taught me a lot about writing and communication also at work. So that's why I always enjoyed writing articles and stuff. And I thought, a book could be interesting. So I ventured into it. It's actually been a while that I started. Over the pandemic, I had a little down cycle and not a lot of motivation. And now this year, I want to just finish it. There's actually a lot that's already there. Just need to, go through and edit a few pieces. And a sneak peek. What can I share? I think one aspect or how structured the book is, there's a lot of remote work books out there and how to communicate well, how to collaborate, which there's parts in my book too focused on, the making it more human part. But I'm starting actually with the individual, the leader itself, in, what can you learn about yourself and how you approach work before you actually engage with others. So kind of making you more aware of yourself and then diving into that. So there's one comment from someone who I gave an early copy to, and he said it's the book is like having a leadership coach, which that's what I also do. So I'm glad that it resonated, that it helps you understand more about your actions first, and then it goes into more of the team stuff. So it starts with the I and then it goes to the we as a team.
Marcus, what do you do to organize your life or organize, your day to day, activities? The reason why I'm asking this is because you have this is the way you have expressed yourself, professionally. So it would be great to get that insight, so that if there are any learnings for the audience, because sometimes I understand that a lot of audience would have the question that, it's trolling, sitting 8 hours in the system doing the work or
Yeah.
whatever work. So how do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, sitting at work and then even writing and talking about work is challenging. And that's why I had this little low,
Yeah.
because you're constantly surrounded by work. You're at work, but then
Mm.
outside of work, you're also doing
Mm.
thinking around work. So for me, that was really hard. And I think the first thing you can do there is acknowledge it and also take a step back. And that's what I did. And having good work-life balance in that sense to disconnect is helpful. And we can probably talk about that too. And other ways how I structure it, I don't know if it's very well structured. I've played around with thousands of tools and this productivity thing and that. But it eventually comes down to like understanding what works for you and not what works for others. So maybe it isn't, for you a well structured process. For me, I have a notes application. I have my calendar and email, and that's about it. And it's a way of like understanding what works for you in that sense. So there's no golden rule or processes I use. It's just taking notes of the things that are standing out to you. If you read something, like take a note of it. I think that's what I learned. Initially I was always just reading things or hearing things, but never actually doing something with it. So I think that's one learning I had of like taking a note wherever it is. Online we can always find it somewhere, of like noting down a quote or a concept or a principle that someone shared to look it up later. And also be okay if it's not digital, if it's like a a journal or something, that's okay too, if you prefer to write with a pen. So I guess to bring in more of my principles that I already shared is like, be curious about yourself and what works for you, and play around, have fun.
So, Marcus, what are some of the non-negotiables while as you craft your work-life integration
Some non-negotiables, you mean for like a workplace I'm going to, or for myself?
for yourself? Because
Okay.
ultimately, Marcus, you shared a couple of very interesting insights during the beginning of the conversation about how do you approach work and what is your
Yeah.
leadership style. So I just wanted to share with the viewers what are some of the non-negotiables. Those are the fundamentals through which you take the step ahead, and you let's say you mentioned about it's okay if you're journaling book. So maybe that's, let's say,
Yeah.
one, let's say, a non-negotiable, right? That activity is non-negotiable. So what are some of the other non-negotiables?
I think the other non-negotiables is running in the morning. I am
Hmm.
currently training for a
Hmm.
marathon, but it's a very good mental health exercise too. If you're whatever sport it is, or going
Yeah.
outside, I also have a dog, so I walk the dog in the morning. So getting out away from the desk in the morning for me is non-negotiable. I think it helps me so much to get a clear brain, and to also not sit at the desk right when I wake up. So that's a
Yeah.
very big negotiable. The next thing is making myself a coffee. I'm also big into coffee, so I have my coffee station. So that's a big non-negotiable. And most of the times I also try to read, whether it's a newspaper or book in the morning, but that fluctuates. It depends on how busy my schedule is. I think those would be the non-negotiables in the morning. And also around lunch, I always walk my dog. So I think there's, again, flexibility is something that's non-negotiable for me, that I can adapt my life to, everything else. And it's called work. No, there was, I forgot the quote. It's, I want to adapt work to my life, not the other way around. I don't want to adapt my life to my work. So that's kind of
Yeah.
how I treat it.
Yeah. So the reason why wanted to share you this insight is because I also to share with the viewers and the audience that sometimes it's the work, and also most of the times what are those small, or rather it could not be small, but still some of the actions that you take before work, so that
Yeah.
when you do your work you're ready to do it the way you would want to. So that's was my why of learning some of those insights. Yes, for some uh, those physical activity, or it could be reading, it's let's say non-negotiable. So thank you, Marcus, for giving insight to your life there. Also, can you discuss some of the importance of fostering inclusivity in remote work environments and how to achieve it?
Yeah, ooh, that's a big topic. um, I think inclusivity is also kind of a non-negotiable nowadays, anyway, because
Yeah.
especially in the companies I've worked at, we work globally,
Mm.
right? Maybe sometimes you only work in, for example, India or in Germany, and you only work with Germans or Indian people. But if you work globally, you work with a lot of diverse people. Even, in India or in Germany, you could work with people that come from different
Yeah.
countries. And that is a big thing. I'm talking about countries because they have a different culture. They treat things differently. They have different languages. English isn't their first language, like it isn't mine. So that comes into it. Then there's so many layers to it. People are different, right? There's introverts, there's extroverts, there's people in the middle, there's people who hate video calls, there's people who like their downtime to really write code. So there's I mean, we're all different. And I think acknowledging that is, for me, what inclusivity is, because it's just, it won't work without it. Like, if we want to work globally distributed, we have to be aware there's people that are different than us. And it does so much to a company. It helps with engagement. People are differently engaged when they feel like the company is inclusive. It also helps with retention. The companies I've been at always had very good retention, because they were also inclusive of various situations, right? You didn't have to, like, oh, I'm becoming a father, or I get a new dog, for example, and your schedule changes, and if the company is inclusive of that, they will adapt to it, right? So there's a lot of nuances to that. We could probably spend the next 2 hours talking about that, but And how I think you get there as like a leader, there's also a lot of things. Some I can mention, like being also clear in your communication guidelines and how you communicate, right? That nothing is vague. So you write down how you communicate, where you communicate, so people understand that. Because maybe someone needs to read it twice to understand where they have to go. Like guidelines in that sense are helpful. Also, cultural training. Not every company or startup can do this because it may cost something, but teaching people about cultures. There's also a few books like The Culture Map, which is a really good book explaining how different cultures show up at work. Like some are very focused on time, like Germans, they need to be punctual. Others are very flexible around time, and it's not because they don't care. It's just that's how they are used to it, right? Um, and having inclusive policies right around your company. You always have some policies around, as I just said, about family leave or holidays, right? Not just create a whole set of public holidays for everyone. Be mindful. I know today is Holi in India. This would be a public holiday, right? For me in Germany it wouldn't. So being inclusive of that. And feedback loops is also always very good to like give feedback on things. It helps with people learning about things quicker. And I mean, first and foremost, recognizing that we're all diverse. That what in a meeting,
Yeah.
there's people that will talk always. There's people
Yeah.
who just listen, and then you need to be aware. Okay, how can I integrate that person that doesn't talk much in a video call to also share their things? Maybe they need time after the call to share their thoughts. So there's so many nuances to it, and I think you only learn about it as a leader if you're being curious about it.
Hmm. So, Marcus, what is your process of dealing with challenges, failures, or disappointments?
Me personally, my own
Yeah,
failures.
yeah, yeah. Be it
I
at the
mean,
workplace, yeah.
yeah, I mean,
because
when
because
I
Marcus,
started,
leaders, I mean, sometimes I have understood that, I know that you have been into several leadership positions, and I would want the audience to understand, what is that process, how do you, overcome that? Or because sometimes I have seen, leaders not sharing too much or expressing too much. So through
yeah,
your learnings, I would like to share that.
I mean, I mentioned to you my transparency and honesty
Yeah,
values. So,
yeah.
like, I'm bound to share things. And I think initially, of course, when you're new in this job, like leading people, you don't want to fail, and you feel like shit, I messed up. You don't want that feeling
Mm,
to happen. But now that I've been doing this for quite a while, I think I can give you a very short answer, because the most powerful thing as a leader that you can do is tell your team or teams or whoever, oh, I messed up. I made a mistake.
mm,
I think that's the most powerful thing you as a leader can do, because your trust will rise like not to infinity,
mm,
but it will rise quite a lot. Because if your team sees you acknowledging your mistake, like they'll have more trust in you, because they're like, oh, this person is for real. They mean what they say. They did a mistake. They acknowledge it. They take it. They're authentic, right? And they'll also do it then in the team. And there's just so many effects that the small little sentence can have, that, yeah, for me, that's probably the easiest thing I do know. Not the easiest, but this the only way I handle mistakes. Of course, for myself, I want to take a lot of learnings out of that. I want to figure out, okay, what did I do? Why did I mess up? What could I have done differently? But the first step should be in a team. Hey, I messed up here. I made a mistake.
Marcus, what is your process of, becoming self-aware and curious? Because those are the two key aspects, that I hear with, the
Yeah.
insights that you're sharing. But then how to develop those two qualities or skills?
Yeah, that is a road that is a little bit less comfortable for leaders, because again, I can only speak about myself. It
Of course,
might
of
vary
course.
for every
Yeah.
individual, but for me, it involved a lot of personal work. I had coaches, like leadership coaches, but then I also did my own coaching training, so I could coach. There's a lot that comes out of that. I went to
Hmm.
therapy. Not a lot of people talk about that, but it relates to your personal life for sure,
Yeah.
but it also relates to your work life. Because I think the ultimate thing to like self-awareness and being more reflective is learning about yourself and how you react to things, right? And maybe initially in your career you don't have that, but with coaching and with therapy, what you do is you talk a lot about things and you get things reflected, right? It's like talking to a mirror. That's what coaching or maybe even therapy is, right? You talk to a mirror. They don't do a lot. They just ask maybe some questions, and then you're like, oh, that's I didn't see it this way, you know. So coaching therapy, big part of that, and it can be uncomfortable because depending on your life there's things you have to work through, but you have to realize that if you don't work through them, your things will also impact others, right? I'm not saying everyone should, solve all their mental health issues in like a shift, but just understanding that how you show up because you're wholly formed human will impact others, right? So those are definitely two big things. In the small, you can what I did, and I think what's helpful. It always sounds a little bit cliche, but journaling, like just in the morning, there's something
Mm,
called the
mm.
morning pages where you just write 3 pages of like conscious stream. Like you just write. It doesn't have to make sense. You can write, oh, today I have a call with Sagar. I hope it goes well. I don't know what he's going to like. Just you just write what comes to mind, and this will help with getting thoughts out because when you write them, you're like, oh, that's what I'm thinking about, and you get them out. So journaling has been helpful. Coaching, therapy. I think those 3 things have been really helpful for me to work on those things, and those will make you self-aware at least a tiny bit more. I don't think there's a magic formula. Do this, download this, and then you'll be more self-aware. That's not how this works. But I think if you want to be a good leader and want to be um, self-aware, you want to be empathetic, you need to work on yourself.
Wow. Thank you, Marcus, for sharing this. It really, really adds a lot of value for the viewers, because what you shared reminds me of a very simple learning that clicked me in the recent times. Most of the complex challenges, the solutions lies in common sense. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing with, especially with the journaling part. I think
Yeah,
it's always you see on LinkedIn, people are talking about it. Everyone, it's just that the action needs to be taken, and I completely agree. It really, really adds value. And secondly, for some reason I see people becoming skeptical to get coaches or therapists. But I think the kind of world we live in, not with respect to work but in general, there is so much happening around us. Especially we have moved out of a pandemic, so I think it's important to take support and take help of people who are experts in helping you find your solutions. So thank you, Marcus,
totally.
for
Yeah.
highlighting that.
To,
Yeah.
and to add on that, yeah, as you said, we're living also in a very chaotic time, right? War
Yeah.
here, there, pandemic, financial situation. So everything will show up at work somehow, right? And as you said it, in coaching especially, it gets sometimes a bad reputation because there's also of course a lot of bad sheep out there that just want to make money and sell
Hmm.
you this one little thing that'll work for you. So you need to
Hmm.
be mindful there. I included a few things in my book there about this too, because um not every coaching is the same. So I think this word has been very tinted with a lot of weird things too. So yeah, just to be mindful there too.
Thank you for sharing that, Marcus. How can leaders effectively give and receive feedback in a virtual setting?
Yeah, I don't think this is limited to virtual, honestly. A lot that we've been talking about, I noticed the virtual global leadership podcast, but that's why I said it can be applied to everyone.
Yeah,
So I don't
yeah,
think this
yeah,
is
yeah.
limited to virtual. I think 2 things here that I always do is first, it needs to be time sensitive. That's why I'm also a very big proponent of having weekly one-on-ones with my direct reports. Because
Hmm.
in this virtual world, we only have this 1 hour every week that I see that person one-on-one. And I wouldn't want to wait like 3 weeks until I see them, because if something happens for them, they have
Yeah.
to wait and maybe forget about it. So feedback, positive or negative, well, negative, but you know what I mean, like in general, all kinds of feedback, needs to be time sensitive. Don't wait
Yes.
for too long because then the learning won't happen. So that's number one. Be like time sensitive. And the second thing is something called the feedback equation I learned from Lara Hogan. She's also, I think she was an engineering leader. Now she's also coaching and consulting. And the feedback equation goes like this is you say what you're observing, you say what the impact is on you, and you add a question or request. And this equals like very actionable feedback, So
Mhm.
that's always something that's been helpful to like write it like that and tell them what you're seeing, why that is, maybe disturbing or not right in your eyes, add a question or request to it, and the other person will have a good way of like understanding where you're coming from. And then for the person receiving feedback, because that's also important, is
Yep.
feedback always comes just from one person. You don't have to accept every feedback because it's always just one data point, right? You can be curious, again bringing this word back in, um, and maybe ask question, hey, why have you been feeling this way, why did you see it this way? You don't have to always take it right in, because that's also where I see a lot of struggles with feedback.
Thank you, Marcus, for addressing that. Uh, are there any tools or technologies you find indispensable for managing remote teams?
Yeah, that as long as I've been interviewing or giving talks, that question always comes up. And it's funny because, we all like our tools, but the first answer I give is, in general, we shouldn't care too much about tools, because tools, aka companies, they can be bought, they can shut down, tools can change, and then your whole system is, messed up. So I would always start with like building processes first, and then adapting them to the tool. That for me is a smarter way to do it. But of course, nowadays there's, the big players. Like Slack is a big thing. You need it to communicate, right? And even managing, you like write with people. Notion is a big thing for documenting, your notes, for example, if you have one-on-one notes and stuff like that. So um, Zoom, I think those three are probably the trifecta of every virtual company, and then also every leader, because you do your meetings, you do your one-on-ones, you have Slack, you have Notion, and then there's other tools for like supporting asynchronous work, but you can even use Notion and Slack for asynchronous work where you don't jump on a call. So um, yeah, I wouldn't want to go too much into all the various tools that are out there. That would be a boring podcast. So I think focus on your process first, write down how you want to communicate, and then find a tool. Does
So
that
some of the tools
answer
that you
your
mentioned.
question?
No, no, thank you, Marcus, for sharing that, because I think we wanted to share with the viewers, on some of the tools that that has supported, or rather, it has helped you also achieve your. So I think the mix of these three, of course, but I think the biggest insight was design the process first and then find the
Yeah.
tool around it. I think that's a biggest learning. Thank you, Marcus, for sharing that. And what strategies can be employed to combat the sense of isolation that sometimes accompanies remote work?
Yeah, I think this is still a big issue. I've faced
Yeah.
this myself. I still face
Yeah.
it with teams. I think this is probably one of the biggest issues, and also what companies use as the main lever to get people back into the office. But
Hmm.
I think there's ways to work around it. I don't think you can solve it 100%, because by the nature of it, if we work globally distributed, we are separated somehow, we talked a lot about some of those things already that help, like networking is a good small little thing you can do for yourself already. Um, Even what I did when I was really feeling isolated is connecting with meetups in your local city. And then at some point, I even created
Hmm.
my own meetup around the remote work and then networked in this way. So, you know, finding little groups in your community can sometimes help with that, because you get this like in-person action. In a company, you can also do quite a few things. Probably a lot have done them or heard about them. I'll say them again, but they are not the end all to all. They help, but they're not fixing everything. So, building in like social interactions within your company, not just doing work, but once in a while having like a game if you can, if time zones allow, play a little online game or interactions. Like I'm a big fan of this game where you have a word and you need to draw it and the others need to guess it, like a pictogram or
Mm,
whatever you call
yeah.
it. I love
Mm-hmm.
this game. It's so simple, but every time I'm like crying out laughing because it's so funny. And again, this builds trust, in relationships. Um, Also leading by example. Like you as a leader have a big role there in terms of, hey, today I went to a meetup in my city, and like others hear that and see that, oh, I could do this too. So as a leader, leadership by example is also a very big topic that I think will help with that. Like, oh, in the morning I'm running with this running group that helps me to connect with people and not feel isolated, So those things. Then the bigger the company, of course, the more resources you have. Mental health support, there's online mental health support that you can use. It's like kind of therapy, but like online, and they help you to connect to like someone you can talk to, if that's the case. And bigger companies are, offering that to allow people to do that, which can be helpful if someone is really struggling with that. Um, of course, physical meetups is great. Retreats. Not every company again has the budget to do those, but maybe there's a few people in your town in India that could meet up or are around that could facilitate a meetup, which is also always very helpful. And maybe one last thing is celebrating achievements too, whether that's at work or even like, hey, I'm training for marathon, and then in Slack you have your social channel where you just share things out of your lives and that give you an insight into people, and then people ask questions and you feel engaged with. So again, those are just some small things you can do. I don't have the solution to fix isolation because by the nature of it, we're isolated, so it's just how we're coping with it that we can handle.
Yeah, no, thank you, Marcus, for sharing this insight, because I wasn't, I mean, I was aware, but when you say this, that this is one of the biggest problems in the organization. So something opened up when the insights that you shared, and I just wanted to share it with you and viewers, and maybe this could be, let's say, one way of looking at it. So how I see isolation is that, okay, it, I mean, for me, it occurred that, okay, we, when a person is experiencing isolation, so one fact is that if you are working remotely for a longer period of time and you're catching up in, let's say, 6 months or a 1 year's times for whatever it reads, so there are things that are happening which are pushing you towards isolation. So maybe you might not immediately feel isolated, but suddenly you would realize after a few months that, hey, I feel isolated, right? So in my understanding, how I see one way of solving this is that we have joined an organization, a remote first organization, at whatever level, at a leadership level or at an employee level, or for that matter a new this thing. So if there is an exercise that happens, that, okay, you have taken this up, okay, of course we have hired you and we have joined it for a specific role and a responsibility for which you are good at, that's why you are part of the team. But then there are other areas also of the life which you have would have consciously or unconsciously evaluated before taking up this role, which is connected to some sort of purpose in your life. Not everyone would have a very very specific or dedicated purpose, but a lot of people, Marcus, in this journey of podcast, I have realized that for them spending time with family is important.
Yeah.
Taking and so on and so forth, or working on a side project is important, going out for travel is important. So maybe if something like this is introduced as a part of the induction process, that you are opening up once you are settled in the organization, and there is a conversation that happens where your leader or the right represent or the right person in the team understands what are the other avenues, so they can keep an eye on, what have you, in those one-on-one leadership, let's say monthly meets or weekly meets, there could be a 15-minute interaction. Hey, how are you building on that? So we are
Yeah.
in that process, but it has to be very conscious, because it is easier said than done. This idea as I speak would sound, oh wow, that's a good idea, but then it, from an implementation level, I feel, one way of, I feel, if I mean, I would really recommend this or share this with at least the companies that are truly truly committed to remote first mindset or remote approach or flexible approach. So this opened up, Marcus, when you were giving an insight.
Yeah. I mean, to add on this, one
Yep.
thing I can mention it kind of relates to isolation too is like in all the companies I've been at, like be it Buffer, Remote, and lastly Parable, like when we hired people, what we did when they came on board, from the first day on, they get an onboarding buddy or even two. And how I always explain this is if you go to an event, networking event, and you go there alone and you're a little bit shy, you feel a little bit weird if you're alone, right? But if you have someone with you,
Yeah,
you can talk with them and then
yeah,
it's easier to integrate. And that's the same thing when people join in new companies, we give them an onboarding buddy. So they have someone already from the day one they can build a relationship with and grow into the company, which is, similar what you kind of alluded to. So that's been always also very helpful to kind of combat isolation from like the first day on.
yeah, yeah. So, Marcus, I have seen these roles such as head of remote and chief of staff.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere they cater to, let's say, such responsibilities. Um, what are the other, let's say, because you've seen this journey from a leadership standpoint for a very long. So, I just wanted to get an insight on some of the missing links that can be done, or some of the missing. I wouldn't say missing, but some of the processes that can be imbibed to ensure that this doesn't happen. So what are your thoughts there?
Oof. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like talking about it as a company, right? Like we're
Yeah,
back with
yeah,
transparency. If the leadership team sees a problem and they talk about it openly, or even the company sees it and they raise it to the company, I think um, that's the biggest thing of like making yourself aware of it and talking about it. I think is what I hear being the most thing that people want, because
yeah,
maybe all of the individuals in a company notice it, but no one talks about it, and then they feel like, oh, why is no one talking about this? So if if you can put it out on the table, it becomes easier to work with.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Marcus. What advice would you give to someone aspiring to lead remote teams effectively?
Whew, read my book. No, well, it's not out there yet.
Of course, of course, of course.
um, I think we talked about some of those things already. It's like work on yourself, right? Start to become a bit more self-aware if you want to become a leader, but also a virtual leader. I think it goes both ways if you're new to it. And then maybe I'll add something in a second. The second thing is be curious to learn about the other persons. And I think specifically to virtual leadership is I think become good at communicating too. Know how to use this call here, the Zoom call or the Microsoft Teams call, whatever you use. Um, know how to write well in Slack. I think those things they sound simple, but I think when you start out as a leader or as a virtual leader, I think you need to start with some of those skills first. So know how to communicate well, which includes also listening well. Um, Start to become a bit more self-aware, reflect, and be curious. I think would be the things which are also in my book. So I'm kind of heavily using using that.
No, no, no. Of course, would love to. I mean, good that Marcus. I think the real stories must come out, and that is also
Yeah,
one of the reasons why I host this podcast. Because Marcus, it is very easy for us to go and use ChatGPT 3, ChatGPT 4, and write the question, and we will get the answer. But a lot of answers would be robotic, and it would
yeah,
have, of course, it would have some elements of the solution, but there is no match to the experiential learning, because ultimately we are humans, and whatever logical steps we take in any organization, there is a lot of humanness attached to it. And that's why I also love the title of the book,
exactly.
which has human word in it. So
Yeah,
thank you for again and again sharing that. I would love to read that book, and maybe for the benefit of the audience, feel free to put up the link on the comment later, post our podcast,
yeah,
so that it becomes easy for us to locate. And finally, Marcus, what one life lesson you have learned from your role as a leadership coach and consultant that you would like to share with the audience?
yeah. There's probably many smaller life lessons. I was thinking about that question a little bit. Um, I don't know if there's probably a smart one that I can mention. I don't know if there's other ones out there, but I think one thing that I had this also in a talk, a presentation I gave is, again, I might sound like a broken record, bringing it all back to transparency and all of that. But I
Yep,
think
yep.
one thing I learned with, becoming self-aware, working on myself is, and trust especially, is that vulnerability, being vulnerable, doesn't come after trust is established.
Yeah,
Instead, it should be smaller exchanges of vulnerability that are the pathway to creating trust. So, kind of
yeah,
summarizing the whole things that I talked about is you shouldn't wait until you have trust with someone to be vulnerable and share things. You should use those smaller things and share them and be vulnerable because they will build trust. And
yeah.
I don't know if this makes me sound smart now, but I think this is really something I learned in my work, but also outside of work life to with friends and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Marcus, something came up to me, when you were sharing this, and of course, some of the answers you shared. So there's a lot of uh, leaders who have been in the traditional workplace, who have spent good amount of time working traditionally, and both in terms of their experiences and expertise, they are also now seeing remote work as one of the primary ways to express themselves professionally. And of course, there are folks who would, from their beginning of their career, they would like to be part of the remote organizations for multiple benefits they visualize. I just wanted your perspective. I know that this is one of the ways or the only way you have expressed professionally. So, what advice would you have for folks who have, let's say, been in the traditional ways of working, and they want to now build on this path? So, so what are your thoughts there?
I don't think there should be any problems. If you done your job in an office, you can also do this virtually. It's just a matter of like not being shy, not having any anxiety around, oh God, I'm not good enough. It's like this is like the imposter talking. And maybe what you can do is like exercise some video calls. If you haven't done a lot of them, like interviewing, ask a friend, hey, can we jump on this video call and see how you behave in this, Because sometimes for me, it feels very natural to be in here and talk to the screen that you're on, right? For
Yeah,
others, it
yeah,
isn't. So I think that's something you can train, especially then for convincing people in an interview, is how do you show up in this rectangle here? And to use
yeah,
again the word human, it's like try to show up as a human as you are. And like, for example, there's pros and cons, but there's a lot of people who use virtual backgrounds,
yeah,
which they can be
yeah,
fine if you're like a salesperson and you need to have like a company logo in the back. But this gives you an insight into the person. It shouldn't be cluttered. There shouldn't be a lot of mess here. There shouldn't be food on the wall. But you can see, oh, there's a picture, there's guitars, maybe he's into music. This already gives you a topic to talk about and makes you more human. So I know this is maybe something just I think it's very personal about the virtual
that's okay.
backgrounds, but
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
something I think you can exercise of like, how do you show up in this rectangle? Because that's where you're going to be.
yeah, yeah. No, Akash, you know what? Personally, I am also not a big fan of virtual background. And
Good,
I
good.
thought I thought a lot about this. Okay, I mean, this is also very important. Everything when you do virtual, everything is important. Sometimes I feel these are my, like, let's say it comes from me as a value system. You know what? My value system is, let's say, transparency. It's okay. I will try to make everything organized behind me, but I don't want
Yeah,
to, I don't want to cut my face and be here.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it comes
exactly.
naturally to me. So that's
You,
how even
you know, when
I
I
look at
when
it.
I when we would be interviewing or work together, I would be very curious. Like, okay, what books are there? Oh, what is he using the
Yeah,
whiteboard for? Like, hey, cool.
yeah,
What do you brainstorm there? Like you get into like being curious about the person more.
yes, yes. Thank you, Marcus. I think we are already an hour into the conversation, almost an hour into the conversation, and it never felt like I'm recording this podcast. It felt like
No,
as if two friends are interacting. So thank you,
yeah,
Marcus. You know what? Usually I ask guests that, hey, were you comfortable with the way this went? So I would say that I was very comfortable interacting with you,
good.
and which actually them from a I got a demonstration of how wonderful, your let's say journey has been in the virtual ways of expression. So thank you, Marcus, for accepting my invitation and joining and sharing your interesting perspectives to the world. And yes, I am excited to read your book, and I'm really looking forward to it, because
Working on it.
this is, yeah, and I would love to do that. And before we end this conversation, it would be great if you share with the viewers what is the best way to reach out to you, or if there is any closing comment you have, please feel to go ahead and express.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way is probably LinkedIn. LinkedIn, where you see this, I didn't include my surname in this here, but you'll find it in the recording of this. So just look me up in LinkedIn, connect with me there. I think that's the easiest way. I also have a website, which is just my first name and my last name just put together, and you'll probably have a link to like my email or anything there if you would want to. And I should probably also link my book. It's not up on this new website, but I'll add it there. So LinkedIn and my website are probably the easiest way to connect.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank
We have
you.
so much to discuss. Maybe a few months down the line, I would love to have you once again, and maybe we'll take up one specific topic, and why not? We can do a masterclass or a webinar on that. Maybe that's something that comes up to me. And and I would also like to thank viewers for always joining and listening to this podcast, and your support and your feedback that I receive on my LinkedIn inbox and Slack, really inspires me to go the extra mile and reach out to wonderful leaders, and bring up their interesting stories and spread it. And I'm just trying to make the best use of LinkedIn through this podcast. Yes, it is a wonderful medium where we reach out, connect, but I think when you have a platform to co-create learning, so why not? So I'm with that intention. I continue this journey, and I promise there are some amazing podcasts coming up in this week, later this week, and early next week. So stay tuned.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.